7 languages, Khalil whispered to himself as he watched the young man's mother scrub marble floors that cost more than most people's cars, never knowing her son could speak to half the world, but today, that world was about to speak back. Welcome back, beautiful souls. If you're ready for a story that will challenge everything you think you know about worth and recognition, smash that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of where you came from? Tomorrow's story will touch your heart just as deeply, and you won't want to miss it. Today we're about to witness how 7 simple words can shatter prejudice and change 2 lives forever. Let's begin this incredible journey. The autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mansouri estate, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor, where Fatima worked with methodical precision. At 52, her knees protested the endless hours spent cleaning, but her movements remained careful, practiced. She had been maintaining this mansion for 8 years, long enough to know that Mr. Rashid Mansouri expected perfection in all things, especially from people he barely acknowledged existed. The heavy oak door opened quietly, bringing with it the crisp October air and the soft footsteps of someone trying not to disturb the pristine silence. Fatima didn't look up. She had learned years ago that eye contact with the family was unwelcome, an intrusion into their world that happened to require her invisible presence. "Mama, I brought your lunch." The voice was gentle, careful not to carry too far into the echoing space. 24-year-old Amari set the small paper bag beside his mother's cleaning supplies, his presence a study in contradictions. His clothes were simple, jeans with careful patches, a sweater that had seen many washings, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. His hands, when they briefly touched his mother's shoulder, were gentle but strong, calloused from his night job loading trucks at the port. "You should be at the library," Fatima murmured in Arabic, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your studies." "I finished early today," Amari replied, switching seamlessly to French. "Professor Laurent said my translation of Camus was exceptional." She smiled then, just for a moment, pride flickering across her tired features. Her son spoke 7 languages: Arabic, French, English, Spanish, Italian, Mandarin, and Portuguese, each one self-taught through library books, online courses, and sheer determination. He had a gift that she knew could take him anywhere, if only the world would give him a chance to show it. What dreams do we carry in silence, waiting for someone to ask us to speak? Share your thoughts below about hidden talents that deserve recognition. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in an office that commanded a view of the city's skyline, Rashid Mansouri reviewed contracts with the casual attention of a man accustomed to success. At 45, he possessed the kind of confidence that came from inheriting wealth and multiplying it through shrewd business decisions. His latest venture, a chain of luxury hotels across Europe and Asia, required careful navigation of international partnerships, each deal another testament to his linguistic capabilities and cultural fluency. The Shanghai investors want another meeting, his assistant informed him through the intercom. They're concerned about the contract language. Rashid leaned back in his leather chair, fingers drumming against mahogany. He spoke 5 languages fluently: Arabic, English, French, Italian, and basic Mandarin, and it had served him well in building his empire. Language was power, he had always believed. It was what separated those who commanded respect from those who scrubbed floors. The irony of that thought would have amused him, had he known that 3 floors below, his housekeeper's son was quietly correcting grammatical errors in a Portuguese business journal he'd found discarded in the mansion's library. A crash of breaking glass shattered the afternoon quiet. Rashid's head snapped up, irritation flashing across his features. He strode from his office, expensive shoes echoing his displeasure as he descended the marble staircase. In the entrance hall he found Fatima on her knees, carefully collecting shards of what had once been a decorative vase, one of several pieces he'd purchased during his last trip to Venice. "Clumsy," he muttered in Arabic, loud enough for her to hear. Exactly what I'd expect. Amari, who had been helping his mother gather the larger pieces, went very still. His fingers tightened around a shard of blue glass, but his voice remained controlled. "It was an accident, sir." She brushed against it while moving the table to clean beneath. Rashid's gaze shifted to the young man with mild surprise. Staff family members weren't supposed to speak unless spoken to directly. "And you are Amari, Fatima's son." "Well, Amari," Rashid said, his tone carrying the casual dismissal of someone addressing a child, "perhaps you should explain to your mother that accidents have consequences. That vase was worth more than she makes in 6 months." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Fatima's shoulders tensed, her weathered hands pausing in their careful work. She had raised her son to be better than this moment, to rise above the small cruelties that seemed to follow families like theirs. Amari stood slowly, brushing glass dust from his palms. When he looked at Rashid, there was something in his dark eyes that the millionaire didn't quite recognize, not defiance, exactly, but a quiet strength that seemed oddly familiar. "Of course, sir," Amari said simply. "Accidents do have consequences." He knelt back down beside his mother, continuing to collect the broken pieces with steady hands. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, a tension that neither man fully understood yet. As Rashid turned to climb back upstairs, he missed the way Amari whispered comfort to his mother in Italian, then switched to Mandarin as he quietly read the shipping label on a nearby package, correcting the translation under his breath. The first collision between their worlds was subtle, unremarkable. The second would change everything. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday that started like any other, but would end with everything changed. Rashid had invited potential investors to his home, 3 wealthy businessmen from different corners of the world, who represented the future of his hotel empire. Giovanni Rossetti from Milan spoke rapid Italian into his phone, his gestures as animated as his voice. Chen Wei from Shanghai sat quietly, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of someone calculating millions, and James Pemberton from London drummed his fingers impatiently, checking his Rolex for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Gentlemen, welcome to my home," Rashid announced as he descended the staircase, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a seasoned negotiator. The meeting would be conducted in English, their common language, though he was prepared to switch to Italian or his limited Mandarin if needed. Fatima worked quietly in the adjacent dining room, polishing silver, with movements so practiced they seemed choreographed. Amari sat in the kitchen, supposedly waiting for her lunch break, but actually listening to every word through the open doorway. His Portuguese textbook lay open beside him. He was teaching himself business terminology, dreaming of a future that felt impossibly distant from this marble-floored reality. "The Shanghai location concerns me," Chen Wei was saying, his English precise but heavily accented. "The contract translation, there are nuances missing, subtleties that could create problems later." Rashid nodded confidently. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Chen. Perhaps we could review the specific clauses you find problematic." Chen Wei pulled out a thick document, pages dense with text in both English and Mandarin. "This section here, the liability clause, the English version says one thing, but the Mandarin translation implies something entirely different. It's not just translation, it's legal interpretation." Giovanni leaned forward, squinting at the text. "I don't read Chinese, but I see similar issues in the Italian contracts. The nuance is lost." Rashid felt the first flutter of uncertainty. His Mandarin was conversational at best, adequate for pleasantries but insufficient for the legal complexities Chen Wei was describing. The Italian contracts had been handled by his legal team, but clearly something had been missed. "Perhaps my translator can clarify," Rashid began. "Your translator isn't here," James Pemberton interrupted, his British accent crisp with impatience. And frankly, Rashid, if you're asking us to invest in international hotels, you need someone who can navigate these linguistic subtleties in real time. We can't wait for translations every time there's a question." The room fell silent, except for the soft clink of Fatima's polishing cloth against silver. In the kitchen, Amari looked up from his textbook, every muscle in his body suddenly tense. He understood every word being spoken, including the Mandarin phrases Chen Wei had muttered under his breath, phrases that revealed the investor's growing frustration with what he saw as Rashid's linguistic limitations. "The contract states reasonable accommodation for cultural practices," Chen Wei continued, pointing to a specific line, "but in Mandarin, the translation suggests mandatory compliance with local customs. These are completely different legal obligations." Rashid stared at the document, the characters swimming before his eyes like incomprehensible art. He had built his fortune on confidence, on the belief that money could buy expertise when needed. But in this moment, with 3 sets of eyes watching him struggle with basic comprehension, he felt something he rarely experienced: genuine inadequacy. "The Portuguese section has similar issues," Giovanni added, flipping to another page. "This clause about property maintenance, the translation makes us liable for things that should be the hotel management company's responsibility." Portuguese. Rashid didn't speak a word of Portuguese, had relied entirely on his legal team's assurances that everything was properly translated. Now, watching his carefully constructed deal begin to crumble over linguistic misunderstandings, he felt sweat gathering beneath his expensive collar. In the kitchen, Amari's hands clenched into fists. He had read contracts like these during his late-night study sessions, had spent hours analyzing the exact type of legal language these men were struggling with. Every mistranslation they identified was glaringly obvious to him, every subtle error a neon sign flashing in his mind. Have you ever watched someone struggle with something you could easily solve, but stayed silent? What held you back? Let us know in the comments. "Look," James said, closing his folder with finality, "I think we need to postpone this until you can provide proper linguistic support. These aren't simple translation errors, they're fundamental misunderstandings that could cost us all millions." "Gentlemen, please," Rashid said, his voice carrying a note of desperation he immediately regretted. "I'm sure we can resolve these issues. My team—" "Your team isn't here," Chen Wei said quietly. "And time is money, Mr. Manzuri. We have other opportunities to consider." The investors began gathering their papers, the universal body language of a meeting gone wrong. Rashid felt his hotel empire slipping away, not through poor planning or insufficient funding, but through his own linguistic limitations, the very thing he had always prided himself on. That's when Amari stood up. The kitchen chair scraped against tile, a small sound that somehow carried across the marble expanse like thunder. Every head turned toward the doorway where he appeared, still wearing his faded sweater, still carrying the quiet dignity that Rashid had dismissed 2 weeks earlier. "Excuse me," Amari said, his voice steady but respectful. "I couldn't help but overhear the Portuguese clause you mentioned. It actually says shared responsibility between parties, not management company liability. The Chinese section uses a phrase that implies culturally sensitive accommodation, which is closer to the English intent than what you're reading." The silence that followed was so complete that Fatima's polishing cloth stopped mid-motion. Chen Wei looked up sharply. "You read Mandarin?" "Yes, sir, and Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, French, and Arabic." Amari stepped into the room, his presence suddenly commanding attention in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or inherited status. "If you'd like, I could explain the actual meaning of each clause." Rashid stared at the young man, the housekeeper's son he had dismissed as inconsequential, feeling something fundamental shift in the room's power dynamic. In that moment, everything he thought he knew about worth, about intelligence, about who deserved respect, began to crumble like the vase that had started it all. The silence stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with disbelief and shifting power dynamics. Rashid's jaw clenched as he watched his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. This young man, this housekeeper's son, had just demonstrated linguistic capabilities that surpassed his own in front of the most important investors of his career. "That's quite a claim," Rashid said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation, "though I'm sure my guests appreciate the enthusiasm." The dismissal was clear, calculated to restore the natural order he understood, but Giovanni Rossetti leaned forward, his dark eyes sharp with interest. "Wait. You said you read Italian?" Amari nodded. "Si, parlo italiano fluentemente." Giovanni's eyebrows shot up at the perfect pronunciation. "Dove hai imparato? Where did you learn?" "Principalmente attraverso libri e corsi online. He studiato la letteratura italiana per 3 anni. Mainly through books and online courses, I've studied Italian literature for 3 years." Chen Wei set down his papers with deliberate precision. "What did I just say in Mandarin 5 minutes ago, under my breath?" Rashid watched, feeling control slip through his fingers like sand. This wasn't supposed to happen. The natural order of things dictated that intelligence belonged to those who could afford elite educations, that linguistic mastery was the province of the privileged, yet here stood living proof that brilliance could bloom in the most unlikely places. "You said the translator was either incompetent or deliberately misleading," Amari replied calmly in Mandarin, then switched to English. "You also mentioned that you were beginning to doubt Mr. Manzouri's attention to detail in other areas of the business." Chen Wei's expression transformed from skepticism to amazement. James Pemberton meanwhile pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "This is ridiculous," Rashid interrupted, his voice rising. "We don't need a cleaning woman's son to interpret business documents. This is a professional meeting between serious investors." The words hung in the air like poison, each syllable designed to diminish and dismiss. Fatima, still frozen by the dining room doorway, felt her heart break a little more with each cruel emphasis. She had spent 8 years enduring these subtle cruelties, but watching them directed at her son, her brilliant, gentle son, ignited something fierce and protective in her chest. "Actually," James said, looking up from his phone, "I've just confirmed something rather interesting." His crisp British accent carried a note of barely suppressed amusement. "I sent a text to my business partner in Sao Paulo in Portuguese. Your young man's translation of that contract clause was absolutely correct. Our legal team got it wrong." Rashid's face flushed red. "I hardly think. The Mandarin is also accurate," Chen Wei added quietly. "More than accurate, it shows understanding of legal subtleties that most professional translators miss." Giovanni was studying Amari with the intensity of someone recognizing unexpected genius. "Tell me about Dante. The Paradiso specifically." "La parte più spirituale della commedia," Amari replied without hesitation, then switched to English for the others. "It's the most spiritual part of the Divine Comedy. Dante moves from the earthly corruption of the Inferno, through the purification of Purgatorio, to the divine love that moves the sun and stars." "L'amour qui move il sol et l'altre stelle," Giovanni murmured, quoting the famous final line. "My God, you've actually read it, in Italian." 3 times, Amari said simply. "It's beautiful in the original language. The translations never quite captured Dante's musical qualities." Rashid felt something cold and sharp twist in his stomach. He had tried to read Dante years ago in English and given up after 50 pages. Yet this young man, this person he had categorized as invisible, inconsequential, spoke of Italian literature with the fluency of a scholar. When has someone surprised you by revealing hidden depths? Share a moment when your assumptions were challenged. "This is all very impressive," Rashid said, fighting to regain control of his own meeting, but we really should focus on the business at hand. I can arrange for proper translators to review these documents. Why? Chen Wei asked bluntly. We have someone right here who clearly understands the nuances better than your legal team did. He's not qualified, Rashid snapped, then immediately regretted the sharpness in his voice. I mean, there are proper procedures, certifications required for this level of certifications? James laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Rashid, I've worked with certified translators who couldn't spot the errors this young man caught in 30 seconds. Amari remained quiet through this exchange, his dark eyes moving between the speakers like someone watching a tennis match where his future was the ball being volleyed back and forth. He could feel his mother's anxiety radiating from the doorway, could sense her fear that he was overstepping, that this moment of recognition might somehow make their lives more difficult. What's your name? Giovanni asked directly. Amari. Well, Amari, would you mind looking at the full Italian section? I'd like your honest assessment of what we're actually agreeing to. Before Amari could respond, Rashid stepped forward, his expensive suit and polished confidence reasserting themselves like armor. I appreciate your enthusiasm, gentlemen, but this is highly irregular. I have professional relationships with certified translation services. We can't simply— Can't what? Chen Wei interrupted, his voice cooling. Can't listen to someone who actually understands what these documents say. Can't acknowledge expertise when we find it. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rashid looked around the room, at his wealthy guests who were clearly impressed by Amari's abilities, at the young man himself standing with quiet dignity, at the contracts that represented his business future lying in dangerous limbo. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain control, to dismiss this unexpected complication and restore the familiar hierarchy where success was measured by bank accounts and pedigree. But he could feel the moment slipping away, could sense his investors' growing impatience with what they clearly saw as stubborn pride interfering with practical solutions. Fine, he said finally, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. Look at the documents, but understand that any decisions will still be made by qualified professionals. Amari nodded respectfully, but as he moved toward the conference table where millions of dollars in contracts waited for proper interpretation, everyone in the room understood that the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. The resistance was crumbling, and with it, everything Rashid thought he knew about worth, intelligence, and who deserved to be heard. The conference table became a battlefield of words and pride, with Amari seated between Chen Wei and Giovanni while Rashid remained standing, a position that felt less like authority and more like isolation. The young man's fingers moved across the documents with practiced precision, his voice steady as he translated not just words, but intent, context, and the subtle legal implications that had escaped expensive professional services. This clause here, Amari said, pointing to a section in the Chinese contract, uses a phrase that literally translates to harmonious cooperation, but in business context, it implies equal financial responsibility for any cultural missteps. Your original translation made it sound like a courtesy when it's actually a significant liability. Chen Wei nodded grimly. That would have cost us millions if we'd discovered it after signing. Rashid watched from across the room, his jaw tight with frustration. Every correct interpretation, every insightful clarification felt like a personal diminishment. He had built his reputation on being the smartest person in the room, the one who understood angles others missed. Now he was relegated to observer while his housekeeper's son commanded the attention of international investors. James Pemberton's phone buzzed constantly as he fired off messages to legal teams across 3 continents, each response confirming Amari's interpretations and revealing errors in the official translations. Remarkable, he murmured after reading another reply. My London solicitors just confirmed that the Portuguese liability clause was indeed mistranslated. You were exactly right about the shared responsibility interpretation. "Thank you, sir," Amari replied quietly, his humility somehow making his expertise more striking. The afternoon stretched on, documents spread across polished mahogany like battle plans. Fatima had retreated to the kitchen, but her anxiety permeated the house like smoke. Every few minutes, she would appear in the doorway, her weathered hands twisting the cleaning cloth, torn between pride in her son's abilities and terror that this unprecedented situation might somehow backfire. Giovanni leaned back in his chair, studying Amari with unconcealed fascination. "How old are you?" 24. "And you learned all of this on your own?" "Yes, sir. Libraries, online courses, language exchange programs." Amari's voice carried no boastfulness, only the quiet confidence of someone stating simple facts. "I work nights at the shipping port. Many of the dock workers speak different languages. They helped me practice." The casual mention of manual labor seemed to strike the investors differently than it did Rashid. Where the millionaire saw confirmation of lower status, the businessmen recognized the dedication required to pursue education while working physically demanding jobs. "What do you do during the day?" Chen Wei asked. "I audit classes at the university when I can. Study. Sometimes I help my mother with," he glanced toward Rashid, then away, "with her work." The careful phrasing didn't fool anyone. They all understood the delicate dance of acknowledging employment without emphasizing the hierarchy that made Rashid so uncomfortable. James set down his phone with finality. "Right. I've spoken with my partners, and we're prepared to move forward with these contracts, provided Mr. Amari here reviews all the translations and gives us his assessment." "That's completely unacceptable," Rashid said, his composure finally cracking. "I won't have my business deals dependent on some untrained." "Untrained?" Giovanni's voice carried a sharp edge. This young man just caught errors that 3 different professional translation services missed. He's demonstrated mastery of legal terminology in multiple languages. What exactly is your definition of trained? The question hung heavy with implication. Rashid felt the walls closing in, his carefully constructed worldview colliding with undeniable reality. These investors, people whose respect he desperately needed, were taking the word of his housekeeper's son over his own professional judgment. How do we react when our assumptions about who deserves respect are challenged? Share your thoughts about recognizing worth in unexpected places. "Look," James continued, his tone becoming businesslike, "we're not asking you to hire him permanently or restructure your organization. We're asking for accurate translations of documents that will govern millions of dollars in investments. Frankly, after today's demonstration, I'd trust his interpretations over your legal teams." Chen Wei nodded agreement. The Shanghai group specifically requested linguistic precision. "If Mr. Amari is willing, we'd like him to review the entire Chinese section." All eyes turned to the young man who had become the unlikely center of this high-stakes negotiation. Amari looked toward his mother standing frozen in the kitchen doorway, then back at the expectant faces around the table. "I'd be honored to help," he said simply. "Excellent." Giovanni pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my Milan office. We'll need the Italian contracts re-reviewed as well." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of languages switching seamlessly, of complex legal concepts explained with clarity that impressed seasoned businessmen, of growing confidence and respect that seemed to fill the room like sunlight. Rashid found himself trapped by circumstance, unable to dismiss the obvious expertise, unwilling to appear unreasonable in front of crucial investors, yet burning with resentment at this fundamental disruption of natural order. As afternoon faded toward evening, the transformed documents lay neatly stacked, each page now carrying accurate translations that protected all parties while maintaining the spirit of the original agreements. "Outstanding work," Chen Wei said, shaking Amari's hand formally. "I'll recommend you to other business contacts who need similar services." "As will I," Giovanni added. "Your understanding of legal nuance is exceptional." James was already typing contact information into his phone. I assume you freelance? We could use someone with your abilities for our European expansions. Amari accepted the business cards with quiet grace, each one representing opportunities that had seemed impossible just hours before. But even as his future brightened, he remained acutely aware of Rashid's growing hostility, of the dangerous position his unexpected recognition had created. The proximity had been forced by circumstance, but the consequences would extend far beyond this single afternoon. As the investors prepared to leave, their contracts properly translated and their respect for the young translator clearly established, everyone understood that something irreversible had occurred. The housekeeper's son had proven himself indispensable. Now came the true test of what that recognition would cost. The investors departed with handshakes, business cards, and promises of future collaborations that would have thrilled Rashid under any other circumstances. Instead, he stood in his marble foyer watching Chen Wei's final words replay in his mind. "We'll be in touch with Mr. Amari directly for the contract finalization." Directly. Not through Rashid, not through his company, but directly with his housekeeper's son. The heavy door closed with a finality that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet mansion. Fatima had vanished into the kitchen, her anxiety palpable even from a distance. Amari remained by the conference table, carefully organizing the corrected documents with the same methodical precision his mother brought to her cleaning. "You can go now," Rashid said, his voice carefully controlled. "Of course, sir." Amari gathered the papers into neat stacks. "Should I leave these here or just go?" But as Amari moved toward the kitchen to collect his mother, something caught Rashid's eye, a small notebook that had fallen from the young man's jacket pocket. Without thinking, he picked it up, intending to call him back. Instead, he opened it. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting in multiple languages, notes that revealed a mind constantly learning, constantly growing. But it was the photograph tucked between pages that made Rashid's breath catch, a faded image of a younger Amari, perhaps 16, standing beside an older Arab man in traditional dress. The man's hand rested proudly on the boy's shoulder, and both wore expressions of deep affection. Rashid stared at the photo, recognition dawning slowly, painfully. "Mr. Mansouri," Fatima's voice was barely a whisper. She had emerged from the kitchen to find him holding her son's most precious possession. "Please, that's private." "Who is this man?" Rashid asked, his voice strange and hollow. Fatima's weathered hands trembled as she reached for the notebook. "Please, sir, it's just an old photo." But Rashid pulled it back, studying the familiar features, the way the man's eyes crinkled with pride and intelligence. "This is Ahmad al-Rashid." The name fell between them like a stone into still water. "You knew Professor al-Rashid?" Fatima's voice broke on the words. Rashid sank into one of his expensive chairs, the photograph still clutched in his hands. Ahmad al-Rashid had been his mentor at university, the professor who had first sparked his interest in international business, who had taught him that language was the key to understanding different cultures and building bridges between worlds. "He was my teacher," Rashid whispered. 20 years ago, he changed my life." Fatima's eyes filled with tears. She had been holding back for 8 years. He was Amari's father. Sometimes the connections that matter most are hidden in plain sight. Have you ever discovered an unexpected link to someone you'd overlooked? Share your story below. The words hit Rashid like a physical blow. He looked up at this woman he had barely acknowledged, seeing her clearly for the first time. "I was a graduate student," Fatima said quietly, settling into a chair across from him, the first time in 8 years she had sat in his presence. "Studying linguistics at the university, Ahmad was my thesis advisor. We fell in love, but," she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "His family couldn't accept a black woman from Sudan. My family couldn't accept that he was older, established. We tried to make it work, but..." Rashid stared at the photograph, memories flooding back. Professor al-Rashid had indeed seemed different during his final year of teaching, distracted, sad, more prone to staring out windows during lectures. Then he had taken early retirement and moved back to Lebanon. He never knew, Fatima continued, her voice growing stronger. I found out I was pregnant after he left. I tried to contact him, but pride, I suppose. His pride, my pride. By the time I realized how foolish I was being, he had passed away. Heart attack, Rashid murmured. 5 years ago, I went to his funeral. I know. I was there too. Fatima's smile was watery but genuine. In the back where no one would notice, the cleaning woman paying respects to a great professor. The irony was staggering. Rashid had spent years building his fortune, convinced that success was about inheritance and privilege, while the son of his most influential mentor, a young man carrying the intellectual gifts of one of the finest minds he had ever known, had been invisible in his own home. Amari doesn't know you knew his father, Fatima said. I never told him. I thought it would only make things more painful, knowing how different his life might have been. Rashid turned the photograph over, finding Ahmad's familiar handwriting on the back. My brilliant boy, may you build bridges between worlds as your mind builds bridges between languages. Papa. The date was just 3 weeks before Ahmad's death. He did know, Rashid said, his voice thick with emotion. Somehow he found out about Amari. This was written just before he died. Fatima gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. He knew about his son? And he was proud. Look at what he wrote. Rashid handed her the photograph, watching as she read her late love's words about their son. In that moment, sitting in his opulent living room while a woman he had dismissed as invisible wept over a father's final blessing, Rashid felt the full weight of his blindness. Every cruel dismissal, every casual insult, every moment of treating Amari as less than human took on a horrific new dimension. This wasn't just his housekeeper's son, this was the child of the man who had taught him everything about respect, about recognizing brilliance, regardless of its packaging, about the fundamental dignity that every human deserved. Ahmad al-Rashid had spent his career teaching students to look beyond surface differences and find the common humanity beneath. His final lesson, delivered through the son Rashid had been too prejudiced to see clearly, was perhaps his most powerful yet. 8 years, Rashid whispered. 8 years you've both been in my house, and I never saw, I never understood. How could you have known? Fatima asked gently, though her tears continued to fall. We were just the help, invisible people. The words cut deeper than any accusation could have. Rashid thought of Ahmad's lectures about dignity, about recognizing the worth in every individual, about the responsibility that came with privilege. He had learned the lessons intellectually, but failed to apply them to the people right under his roof. Footsteps in the foyer announced Amari's return from the car where he had been waiting for his mother. He appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from mild concern to alarm as he saw both adults in tears. Mama, is everything all right? Rashid looked up at this young man, Ahmad's son, and felt 20 years of carefully constructed superiority crumble into dust. The backstory had been unveiled, and with it, the true scope of his failure. Please, sit down, Rashid said, his voice carrying a gentleness that Amari had never heard before. Both of you. There's something I need to share. Amari hesitated in the doorway, clearly confused by the emotional atmosphere and his mother's tears, but something in Rashid's tone, vulnerable, almost broken, made him move to the chair beside Fatima. Rashid held out the photograph with trembling hands. Your father? I knew your father. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Amari took the photo carefully, his dark eyes widening as he recognized the familiar script on the back, handwriting he had only seen in old letters his mother treasured but rarely showed him. Professor Ahmed al-Rashid, Rashid continued, his voice thick with memory. He taught international business and cultural studies at the university. He was a most influential teacher I ever had. Amari looked up sharply. You were his student? For 3 years, he changed everything about how I understood the world. Rashid's laugh was shaky, self-deprecating. He used to say that true intelligence wasn't about what languages you spoke, but how well you listened to what others were really saying. He taught me that wisdom could come from anywhere, from professors, from janitors, from children, from anyone willing to share their truth. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Rashid had learned these lessons 20 years ago, then spent 8 years failing to apply them to the very people who needed them most. I remember this photo being taken, Fatima said softly. It was at the university's language fair. Amari was 16, helping translate for international visitors. Ahmad was so proud. He should have been, Rashid said, looking directly at Amari. Today, watching you work with those contracts, I saw him. The same intellectual curiosity, the same gift for understanding not just words, but meaning, the same quiet dignity. Amari's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. I've always wondered what he was like. Mama told me stories, but he was brilliant, gentle. He saw potential in everyone, especially in people others overlooked. Rashid paused, the weight of his failures settling on his shoulders. He would be ashamed of how I've treated you both. Mr. Mansouri, Fatima began. Rashid, he corrected gently. Please. After today, I think we're past formalities. A comfortable silence settled over them, broken only by the soft tick of an antique clock. For the first time in 8 years, the three of them occupied the same space as equals, not employer and employees, but people connected by grief, memory, and the ghost of a man who had loved them all in different ways. Tell me about him, Amari said quietly. Please, what was he like as a teacher? Rashid's face transformed with genuine warmth. Demanding, he never accepted anything less than your absolute best effort, but kind, incredibly kind. He had this way of making you believe you could accomplish anything if you were willing to work for it. He sounds wonderful, Amari said, and there was hunger in his voice, the deep need of a son who had grown up with only fragments of his father's story. He used to hold these informal gatherings at his apartment, students from all over the world, sharing food and stories and ideas. Your father believed that real learning happened when people felt safe enough to be vulnerable with each other. Fatima smiled through her tears. He did the same thing when I knew him. He would cook for me, terrible cook, actually, and we would sit on his balcony talking about everything and nothing. Languages, poetry, dreams for the future. What did he dream about? Amari asked. A world where people saw past surface differences, Fatima said, where a person's worth wasn't determined by their accent, their skin color, their parents' bank account. He believed in the fundamental dignity of every human being. What would change if we saw people through the eyes of love, rather than judgment? Share your thoughts about second chances below. Rashid felt each word like a gentle knife, cutting away layers of prejudice and assumed superiority. He used to tell us that privilege was a responsibility, not a reward, that those who had been given much had an obligation to lift others up. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, Amari said quietly. About responsibility. About what I owe to the opportunities I've been given, even if they came through hardship. What do you mean? Rashid asked. Amari looked at his hands, choosing his words carefully. The languages I learned them because I wanted to understand people. At the docks, I meet men from everywhere. Somalia, Philippines, Mexico, Poland. They work the same long hours I do, send money home to families they miss desperately. Their stories, they taught me that we're all trying to build something better for the people we love. The simple eloquence of his words struck Rashid with unexpected force. This young man had found wisdom in dock workers and night shifts that Rashid had missed, despite his expensive education and international travel. "Your father would be proud," Rashid said, and meant it completely. "Not just of your linguistic abilities, but of your character. The way you helped today, you could have been bitter, resentful. Instead, you were gracious, professional, dignified." "Mama raised me to be better than my circumstances," Amari said, glancing affectionately at Fatima. "She always said that how people treat you says more about them than about you, but how you respond, that says everything about who you choose to be." Rashid looked at this woman he had barely acknowledged, seeing clearly for the first time the strength, intelligence, and grace that had shaped the remarkable young man sitting beside her. "Fatima," he said, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond words, both of you. I've been—" He struggled for adequate language. "I've been everything Ahmad taught me not to be." "We all make mistakes," she said gently. "What matters is what we do when we recognize them." As the sun set outside the tall windows, casting golden light across the marble floors, the three of them continued talking, sharing memories of Ahmad, dreams for the future, and the fragile beginning of something that looked like friendship. The barriers that had seemed so solid just hours before were dissolving, replaced by the recognition of shared humanity that Ahmad al-Rashid had spent his life teaching. The bonding was real, precious, and healing. But it was also fragile, and the true test was yet to come. The fragile peace lasted exactly 3 days. It shattered on Friday evening when Rashid's business partner Khalil Nazari arrived unannounced with his wife Layla and their circle of wealthy friends. They swept into the mansion like a storm of expensive perfume and entitled laughter, expecting the usual evening of champagne, gossip, and the casual cruelty that passed for wit among their social circle. Rashid had spent those 3 precious days in a state of cautious optimism. He had raised Fatima's salary, given Amari access to his extensive library, and even found himself looking forward to their conversations about language, literature, and Ahmad's memory. For the first time in years, his home felt warm rather than merely impressive. But as Khalil's voice boomed through the entrance hall, demanding attention and service, Rashid felt his old instincts reassert themselves like muscle memory. "Rashid, where's that excellent whiskey you keep hidden?" Khalil called out, his words already slightly slurred from pre-dinner drinks elsewhere. "And tell your staff to hurry, we're famished." Fatima appeared as she always did, invisible and efficient, ready to serve drinks and prepare food for unexpected guests. But this time, Amari was with her, carrying books he'd borrowed from Rashid's library, his presence in the main house no longer hidden or apologetic. Layla Nazari's sharp eyes immediately fixed on him. "Rashid darling, why is there a young man with your cleaning woman? Is this some sort of family visit?" The question carried venom disguised as curiosity. Rashid felt every gaze in the room turn toward him, waiting for his response. These were his peers, his business associates, the people who controlled contracts worth millions. Their approval had shaped his life for decades. "That's Fatima's son," Rashid said carefully. "Amari." "How quaint," said Nadim El-Khari, another businessman whose empire was built on construction contracts. "Does he help with the cleaning too?" The laughter that followed was sharp, cutting. Amari's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing, simply moved toward the kitchen as he had been trained to do for 8 years. "Actually," Rashid began, feeling the weight of recent revelations, "Amari is quite remarkable. He speaks 7 languages, and just helped me close a major deal with international investors." The silence that followed was different from the respectful quiet he'd hoped for. It was the silence of people processing something that didn't fit their worldview, something that threatened the comfortable hierarchies they relied upon. Khalil's laugh was the first to break it, loud and mocking. 7 languages. Come now, Rashid, what's next? You'll tell us your gardener has a PhD in botany." "I'm serious," Rashid said, his voice gaining strength. Chen Wei from Shanghai specifically requested to work with Amari directly. His linguistic abilities are exceptional. Linguistic abilities, Layla repeated, her tone dripping with condescension. How absolutely progressive of you, Rashid. Though I do hope you're not planning to parade the help around at business meetings. It sends rather the wrong message, don't you think? Have you ever watched someone you care about being mocked by people whose opinions you once valued? How do we find the courage to stand up when it matters most? The words hit Rashid like ice water. He looked around the room at faces he had considered friends, seeing clearly for the first time the casual cruelty that masqueraded as sophistication. These were people who would never see past Amari's circumstances, never recognize the brilliance that Rashid himself had been blind to for so long. In the kitchen doorway, Amari stood perfectly still, close enough to hear every word. His expression was carefully neutral, but Rashid could see the pain in his dark eyes, not just at the mockery, but at watching someone he had begun to trust waver in their support. "Perhaps we should discuss business," Rashid said weakly, trying to change the subject. "Oh, but this is so much more interesting," said Nadim. "Tell me, does this linguistic prodigy also wait tables? I could use someone who speaks multiple languages at my next charity gala. Think of how exotic it would be." The group erupted in laughter again, the kind of laughter that fed on others' diminishment. Rashid felt caught between two worlds, the new understanding he'd found with Amari and Fatima, and the familiar comfort of belonging to this circle of wealth and status. "He's not a curiosity," Rashid said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Of course not," Khalil said with exaggerated seriousness. "I'm sure he's very capable, for someone in his position." The phrase hung in the air like a judgment. Someone in his position, not someone with gifts or potential or inherent worth, but someone defined entirely by the circumstances of his birth, his skin color, his mother's occupation. Rashid looked toward the kitchen where Amari still stood, witnessing this moment of choice. He thought of Ahmad al-Rashid, of the lessons about dignity and courage, of the pride in his mentor's eyes when he spoke about standing up for what was right. But he also thought of the business deals that depended on these relationships, the social connections that had built his empire, the comfortable world that required him to see some people as more valuable than others. "You're right," Rashid heard himself saying, the words tasting like ash. "I shouldn't have gotten carried away. It was just unusual circumstances." The betrayal landed like a physical blow. Amari's expression didn't change, but something died in his eyes, the hope that had been growing over 3 precious days, the belief that recognition and respect might actually be possible. "That's our sensible Rashid," Layla said, patting his arm approvingly. "For a moment there we thought you'd gone completely soft." As the group moved toward the dining room, chattering about other topics, Rashid caught sight of Amari retreating into the kitchen where his mother waited. Through the doorway, he could see Fatima's arms wrap around her son, offering comfort for wounds that never seemed to fully heal. The worst part wasn't the mockery from his so-called friends. The worst part was that when it mattered most, when courage and character were called for, Rashid had chosen the safety of his old prejudices over the revolutionary possibility of seeing people as they truly were. He had shattered the fragile bond they'd built, and he wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. Ahmad al-Rashid's son deserved better. And deep in his heart, Rashid knew he had failed his mentor's final lesson. The mansion felt different after Khalil's group finally left near midnight, their laughter and casual cruelty lingering in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Rashid stood alone in his living room, surrounded by empty glasses and the bitter taste of his own cowardice. He had barely slept for 2 nights, Ahmad's words haunting him. True character is revealed not in comfort, but in the moment when standing up costs you something precious. On Sunday morning, Rashid found himself pacing his office, staring at the business cards Chen Wei and Giovanni had given Amari. The investors had already called twice, asking to speak with the young translator directly about finalizing the hotel contracts. Each call was a reminder of opportunity and of his failure to protect the person who had made those opportunities possible. Through his window he could see Fatima in the garden, hanging laundry on the line behind the house. Her movements were slower than usual, weighed down by a resignation that made Rashid's chest ache. Amari was nowhere to be seen, though Rashid knew he was probably at the port, working his night shift, pretending that dignity could be preserved through labor and silence. The phone rang again. Giovanni's number. "Mr. Manzuri, I've been trying to reach Amari for 2 days. We need him to review the final Italian contracts before we can sign." Rashid gripped the phone tighter. He's not available for that kind of work anymore." "Not available? What do you mean? Did someone else hire him?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Rashid could lie, could make excuses, could protect his comfortable world by keeping Amari hidden away where he belonged. Or, "No," Rashid said quietly. "No one else hired him." "Then what's the problem?" "Rashid, I'm confused. 3 days ago you seemed proud of his abilities. Now you sound like you're trying to hide him." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was absolutely true. Rashid was trying to hide Amari from his friends, from his social circle, from a world that would judge them both for crossing lines that were supposed to remain uncrossed. "It's complicated," Rashid said weakly. "Is it? Or is it simple?" Giovanni's voice carried the sharp edge of a man who recognized cowardice when he heard it. "Let me be clear, Rashid. We're prepared to offer Amari a consulting contract worth more money than most people his age see in a decade. We're talking about opportunities that could change his entire life. Are you really going to stand in his way because it makes you uncomfortable?" After hanging up, Rashid sat in his leather chair, staring at the photograph of Ahmad that he had kept on his desk for 15 years. His mentor's eyes seemed to bore into his soul, asking the questions Rashid had been avoiding. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you do when doing right costs you something precious? When was the last time you had to choose between comfort and courage? Share your thoughts about moments that define who we really are. That afternoon, Khalil called with news that made Rashid's stomach clench. "Darling Layla was so amused by your little translation story that she shared it at the country club," Khalil said, his voice bright with malicious gossip. The whole room was in stitches. Ibrahim El-Mansour was practically crying with laughter. "Apparently he's been looking for entertainment for his next dinner party and wants to borrow your linguistic prodigies for the evening." The casual cruelty was breathtaking. These people, his people supposedly, wanted to turn Amari into a performing curiosity, a novelty to amuse their guests. The very idea made Rashid feel sick. "That's not, Khalil, that's not what he is." "Of course not, Habibi. But you have to admit, it's rather funny. The cleaning woman's son speaking 7 languages. It's like something out of a comedy." Rashid closed his eyes, remembering Amari's quiet dignity as he translated complex legal documents, his gentle corrections that had saved millions in potential lawsuits, his respectful demeanor even while demonstrating intellectual gifts that surpassed everyone in the room. "It's not funny," Rashid said quietly. "What? Rashid, don't tell me you're taking this seriously. It was just a bit of fun." "No, it wasn't fun. It was cruel." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for Rashid to hear his own heartbeat. When Khalil spoke again, his voice carried a warning. "Careful, my friend. People are already talking about your unusual interests. Don't give them more reason to question your judgment." The threat was clear: conform or face social exile from the circles that had defined his identity for decades. That evening, Rashid found himself standing outside the small apartment above the garage where Fatima and Amari lived. He had never been here before, had never even thought about where they went when their work in his house was finished. The apartment was tiny but immaculate, filled with books in multiple languages and certificates from online courses mounted carefully on the walls. A small desk by the window held Amari's notebooks, pages covered with translations, vocabulary lists, and what looked like the beginnings of his own language learning curriculum. "Mr. Manzuri?" Fatima appeared in the doorway, surprise and wariness mixing in her expression. "I came to apologize," Rashid said, "to both of you." Amari emerged from what must have been a bedroom, his face carefully neutral. He had learned, over years of small humiliations, to protect himself by showing nothing. "Friday night," Rashid continued, "I failed you. I failed Ahmad. I failed myself. When you needed me to stand up for what was right, I chose comfort over courage." "You don't owe us anything," Amari said quietly, but there was pain beneath the politeness. "I owe you everything. Your talents, your grace under pressure, your dignity in the face of disrespect. You saved my business deals and asked for nothing in return. And when my friends mocked you, I let them." Rashid pulled out the business cards Giovanni and Chen Wei had given Amari. "They've been calling. They want to offer you a consulting contract. Real work, real money, real recognition." Amari looked at the cards but didn't take them. "And what do you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with years of complicated history. Rashid thought of Ahmad's lessons, of the man he had tried to become versus the man he had settled for being. "I want to be worthy of your father's memory," Rashid said. "I want to choose courage over comfort, even if it costs me everything I thought I valued." In the small apartment filled with books and dreams, and the quiet dignity of people who had never stopped believing in better possibilities, Rashid waited for an answer that would determine not just Amari's future, but his own path toward redemption. 6 months later, Rashid stood in the lobby of his first international hotel in Milan, watching Amari conduct a business meeting with European investors in flawless Italian. The young man had traded his patched jeans for a tailored suit, his quiet dignity now complemented by the confidence that came from being recognized, valued, and respected for his true worth. "Signor Amari, è davvero eccezionale," Giovanni was telling a potential new investor. "His understanding of international contract law across multiple languages has saved us millions in translation errors." Rashid smiled, remembering the day 6 months ago when everything had changed. Not the day Amari had proven his abilities, that had merely revealed what was always there. The real change had come when Rashid chose to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. The cost had been significant. Khalil Mazari no longer spoke to him. Half of his old social circle had distanced themselves when Rashid publicly defended Amari against their mockery at the country club. Several business relationships had cooled when he insisted on treating his housekeeper's son as an equal partner in international negotiations. But the rewards had been extraordinary. Amari's consulting firm, launched with Rashid's financial backing and passionate recommendation, now handled translation services for businesses across 3 continents. Chen Wei had been the first major client, followed quickly by Giovanni's Italian holdings and James Pemberton's London operations. Word spread through international business circles about the brilliant young linguist who combined technical accuracy with cultural insight. "Papa would be proud," Fatima said, appearing beside Rashid in the hotel lobby. She no longer cleaned houses. Rashid had hired her as his household manager, a position that utilized her organizational skills and treated her with the dignity she had always deserved. But more than that, she had become a friend, someone whose wisdom he genuinely valued. "He would be proud of you too," Rashid replied, meaning it completely. "You raised an extraordinary son under impossible circumstances." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see Amari gesturing expressively as he explained contract nuances to the Italian investors. His passion for language had found its perfect outlet, and his natural teaching abilities had made him sought after not just as a translator, but as a cultural bridge builder. How often do we witness a life transformed by recognition and opportunity? Share your thoughts about the power of believing in someone's potential. Mr. Manzouri, a young woman approached Amari's newest hire, a brilliant linguistics graduate from Syria whose talents might have gone unnoticed in a more traditional business environment. Amari had specifically sought out translators from immigrant and refugee communities, understanding that brilliance often bloomed in unexpected places. "Yes, Lila? Amari asked me to give you this." She handed him an elegant envelope embossed with the letterhead of the International Council for Business Translation Standards. Inside was a formal invitation to serve as keynote speaker at their annual conference, with a note in Amari's familiar handwriting: "They want you to speak about recognizing hidden talent in unexpected places. I told them I knew the perfect person, someone who learned that true worth has nothing to do with circumstances of birth. Thank you for choosing to see me." Rashid felt tears prick his eyes. The boy, no, the man, who had once been invisible in his own home, was now inviting him to share the stage at international conferences. The transformation was complete, but it had required both of them to change. "There's something else," Layla continued. "The Ahmad al-Rashid Foundation wants to meet with you both next week." The foundation, established jointly by Rashid and Amari to provide language education and translation services to immigrant communities, had become Amari's greatest passion project. Named in honor of the father he had barely known, it embodied Ahmad's belief that language was the key to breaking down barriers between people. The foundation's success had been remarkable. In just 6 months, they had provided free language classes to over 500 immigrants, helped dozens find better employment through improved communication skills, and created a network of volunteer translators who assisted newcomers in navigating everything from medical appointments to job interviews. "The foundation board wants to expand internationally," Layla explained. "They're offering full funding for programs in London, Frankfurt, and Toronto." As the meeting in the conference room concluded, Amari approached with the easy confidence of someone who had found his place in the world. The investors were clearly impressed, their body language radiating the respect that Rashid had once withheld. "How did it go?" Rashid asked. "They want to hire us for their entire European expansion," Amari said, his smile bright with satisfaction. 37 hotels across 12 countries. "It's our biggest contract yet." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The young man who had once been dismissed as the housekeeper's son was now commanding fees that rivaled the income of the millionaires who had mocked him. But money wasn't the real victory. "I got a call from the university today," Amari continued. "They want me to teach a course on international business communication, part-time, so I can continue with the consulting work." "Professor Amari," Rashid said, savoring the sound of it, "your father would be—" "I know." Amari's voice was soft with emotion. "I can feel him sometimes, you know. When I'm teaching someone a new language, when I'm helping them communicate something important, it's like he's there, guiding my hands." As they prepared to leave the hotel, Rashid caught sight of their reflection in the polished marble wall. 2 men, one Arab, one black, one born to privilege, one to struggle, walking side by side as equals, as friends, as partners in building something meaningful. The housekeeper's son had become a successful businessman, teacher, and bridge builder between cultures. The millionaire had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives you touched and the barriers you helped break down. And Ahmad al-Rashid's legacy lived on in every language barrier overcome, every prejudice challenged, every moment when someone chose to see past surface differences to the brilliant humanity beneath. 6 months ago, a young man had whispered 7 languages to himself while watching his mother scrub floors. Today, those 7 languages were building bridges across continents, creating opportunities for hundreds of others, and proving that brilliance, when finally recognized and nurtured, could change not just individual lives but entire communities. The transformation was complete, but the work, the beautiful, vital work of seeing and valuing every human being, would continue for the rest of their lives. What dreams are waiting to be recognized in the people around you? Share your commitment to seeing beyond circumstances to potential in the comments below.
If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.